August in Blue Ridge was always stifling, the air thick with humidity and dust drifting from the distant hills. A battered old pickup truck came to a stop outside a modest, red brick building, the headquarters of the Blue Ridge City Police Department. Stepping out of the vehicle was a black man dressed in a faded plaid shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed sneakers. No one would have guessed he was a police officer, let alone Chief Johnson, who had just been appointed 3 days prior. He wore no badge, had no escort, no welcome ceremony, and that was entirely by design. After more than 20 years of service, from patrol to investigation to leadership, Johnson had learned one important truth. If you want to see the true nature of an organization, don't let people know who you are. He knew that the Blue Ridge precinct had long been criticized for favoritism, discrimination, and lack of professionalism. But dry reports could never fully reflect reality. And to reform it, he needed to witness it firsthand. As he entered the station yard, he heard lively chatter and laughter. A few officers glanced at him as they passed, then looked away. Not one recognized that he was the man they would soon call Chief. No one asked his name. No one invited him in. To them, he was just a stranger in shabby clothes, and that alone was enough to ignore him. Johnson strolled through a side entrance, greeted by stale coffee and disinfectant stench. The hallway stretched ahead, tile floors gleaming under the cold fluorescent light. He didn't rush, his eyes scanning each group of officers gathered, some joking around, others with their feet propped up reading the paper, a few aimlessly skimming through files. No one said hello. No one asked anything. No one cared. He gave a slight nod, lips pressed together. The first impression already said quite a lot. But even he didn't expect a deeply offensive act to occur just minutes later, inside the building, meant to stand for justice and respect. And it would ignite a shockwave that would transform the entire culture of the Blue Ridge Police Department. "Hey, you there!" A harsh shout rang out from the hallway, making Johnson stop. A tall, burly white officer in his 40s with cropped blonde hair strode toward him, his face twisted in barely concealed disdain. The name on his badge read, Officer Jimmy. "This is a police station, not a relief shelter. You're in the wrong place." Jimmy roared, making sure his voice carried to the other officers nearby. Snickers started to ripple through the group behind him. Johnson remained calm. He was about to speak when Jimmy raised a hand to stop him, lips curling into a smirk. "You hear me? I said get out. We don't need your kind loitering around here." Your kind. The words sliced like a blade, thick with implication. The nearby officers burst into louder laughter. One even slapped the desk, nodding with amusement. Johnson still said nothing. He stood there, eyes locked on Jimmy, with a calm gaze, but a deep, quiet disappointment behind it simmered. Then, in a moment no one expected, Jimmy spit directly into his face. The hallway fell dead silent for a second. The laughter choked off. One officer muttered, "Oh, hell." But Jimmy stood unfazed, wearing a smug expression of triumph. Johnson took a deep breath, feeling the warm, sticky saliva drip slowly down his cheek. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his face slowly, deliberately, as if ensuring no trace was left, not just from his skin, but from his dignity. Then he looked at Jimmy and spoke, his voice low but clear with each word. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through that door?" Jimmy shrugged, sneering. "Only the ones who don't belong here." More laughter erupted, but this time some of the eyes behind it weren't as amused. A few looked away. Some stared at the floor. Johnson didn't respond. He quietly turned and walked past the crowd, leaving murmurs, curious glances, and an atmosphere growing colder by the second. A voice came over the intercom. "All personnel, report to the briefing room immediately. Urgent announcement." In just a few minutes, that room would witness a truth that would silence the entire Blue Ridge precinct and mark the end of an old era. The large meeting room at the Blue Ridge precinct gradually filled up. Laughter and casual chatter still echoed, especially from the corner where Jimmy and his usual group of colleagues were gathered. They had no idea that an earthquake would erupt right where they stood. On the podium, Captain Harris, a stocky man with a salt and pepper mustache, clapped his hands to call for an order. "All right, quiet down. Today is an important day. I need you all to take this seriously." The room slowly settled. Jimmy yawned, arms crossed as he leaned against the wall, wearing his usual lazy expression. Harris continued, "As you all know, with Chief Caldwell's retirement, we've been awaiting a successor. And today, I'm honored to introduce the new chief of the Blue Ridge Police Department." He turned toward the side door, his tone formal. "Please welcome Chief Johnson." The door opened, and the man in the checkered shirt, faded jeans, and worn-out sneakers, the very one Jimmy had spit on just minutes earlier, stepped up to the podium holding a briefcase. The entire room fell dead silent. Jimmy froze in place, face drained of all color. Those who had laughed earlier now looked down, eyes avoiding contact. Johnson set his briefcase on the podium and opened it deliberately. He scanned the room, calm yet piercing, his gaze landing directly on Jimmy before he began to speak. "Good morning." His voice was steady and low, but sliced through the heavy atmosphere like a blade. "My name is Johnson. As of today, I officially serve as the chief of the Blue Ridge Police Department." Utter silence. No one dared to breathe too loudly. He paused for a few seconds before continuing. "This morning, I walked in here as a stranger, and what I witnessed wasn't a team of model officers, but a distorted image of power, prejudice, and blatant disrespect." Several officers lowered their heads. Jimmy stood rigid, sweat forming at his temples. "Sadly, I was treated like garbage right inside my own station. Not because I did anything wrong, but simply because I didn't look like someone who belonged here." Johnson turned his gaze directly to Jimmy, eyes fixed. "And I'm not saying this to shame anyone. I'm saying this to make one thing clear. Change is no longer optional. It is mandatory." The room froze in a collective mix of shock and shame. The truth had been laid bare, and no one, least of all Jimmy, could avoid the consequences of their actions anymore. The meeting room remained silent, the atmosphere thick, as if each person was forced to confront their conscience. Johnson didn't need to raise his voice. He stepped to the edge of the podium, his tone low but sharp as ice. "I didn't come here to be welcomed. I came here to see the truth." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a handkerchief he had used to wipe off the spit Jimmy had hurled at his face. He held it up without saying another word. That gesture alone made Jimmy lower his head, his face flushed red like burning coal. "I disguised myself because I wanted to see what no report can capture, how you treat someone you think is beneath you. And what I saw was contempt, was prejudice, was a toxic culture embedded in every word, every mocking laugh I heard here." Some officers in the seats suddenly felt their breath catch. The sarcastic remarks, the sideways glances, the silent compliance, now felt like mirrors turned inward. Johnson paused briefly, then looked at Jimmy, frozen stiff by the wall. "Officer Jimmy," he said, enunciating every word, "your behavior this morning wasn't just a personal insult. It was a disgrace to the badge, a betrayal of the oath you once recited beneath the flag." The room held its breath. "And for that, I am declaring, you are hereby suspended, effective immediately. An internal investigation will begin today." Jimmy stared at Johnson, mouth slightly open as if to object, but the chief's stern gaze made him swallow his words whole. Johnson stepped back behind the podium. His voice lowered, but this time it carried steel and resolve. "I didn't come to Blue Ridge to make friends. I came to make change. and change must begin with truth, no matter how ugly it is. From today forward, there is no place here for apathy, for prejudice, or for abuse of power. If you cannot adjust to that, you are free to leave the force. The room's silence was no longer confusing. It was a realization. Some bowed their heads. Others sat upright, not from fear, but because they had been awakened. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," Johnson concluded, "but I demand, and will require, that you make a choice. Either become a true protector of the people, or leave before you harm anyone else." He stepped down from the podium. No further threats are needed. Every step he took echoed clearly, like a bell tolling the beginning of a new era. The next morning, Chief Johnson's office was flooded with files. Stacks of thick reports, long-ignored complaints, and unfinished investigations filled every corner. He began with the first name on his desk, Jimmy. "I want every complaint, every internal memo, and even informal reports, everything about Jimmy, on my desk by the end of today," Johnson ordered Internal Affairs through the intercom. Not long after, the findings left him speechless. Jimmy had at least 6 complaints filed over the past 5 years, including incidents of unnecessary use of force, racially charged language, and threatening behavior toward civilians. All of it had been swept under the rug or left unaddressed. Johnson gripped the file tightly in his hand. This wasn't just the misconduct of a single man. It was the result of a culture of silence, of colleagues turning a blind eye, of a system that had lost its moral compass. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the precinct had begun to shift. Officers no longer laughed loudly in the hallways. The glances exchanged were more cautious. Jimmy had been completely isolated. No one talked to him or dared defend him. The story from the previous morning had spread across the entire department like a storm. In a corner of the waiting room, Officer Reyes, a young female officer, gently knocked on Johnson's office door. "Excuse me, may I speak with you for a moment?" Johnson invited her in, his eyes firm but not unkind. Reyes sat down, her hands nervously clasped. I saw how Jimmy treated you yesterday, and I know it wasn't the first time. I've seen him act the same way toward civilians, even toward new recruits. But I was scared. I stayed silent." She lowered her head, her voice nearly breaking. "But I don't want to keep doing that. If you'll still allow me, I want to start over." Johnson looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "We've all been afraid at some point. What matters is when we choose to step out of that fear. And today, you've done that. Change starts with people like you, Reyes, and I will stand with you, as long as you're truly ready to change." That afternoon, Johnson launched a full internal audit. He ordered every department head to submit detailed reports on how complaints were handled, the training protocols in place, and the current internal conduct standards over the past 12 months. Starting today, he declared in a department-wide meeting, every action, every word will be observed and recorded, not to suppress you, but to protect those who truly deserve to be called officers of the law. If you can't accept that, the door is open. Some eyes lowered, others began to lift. Johnson wasn't looking for fear. He was looking for awakening. After Jimmy's suspension and the tense department-wide meeting, the atmosphere at the Blue Ridge Police Department shifted dramatically. Gone were the fake handshakes and the mocking laughs, echoing down the hallways. Officers now moved more quietly. Glances exchanged between colleagues no longer carried the same ease. Caution and reflection crept into every step. Jimmy was completely isolated. Once the loudest voice at internal parties, once the unspoken power during night shifts, he sat alone in the corner of the break room. No one spoke to him. No one offered him coffee. Some older officers quietly stepped back, citing transfers or requesting extended leave. They understood that the era of cover-ups and looking the other way was over. Meanwhile, outside those walls, the town of Blue Ridge began to feel that something was changing. An image of Chief Johnson speaking with residents at a local park began circulating widely on social media. One post read, "I never trusted the police until I saw him bend down to help a lost elderly woman and walk her all the way home." At a school fair, Johnson showed up unannounced. No security detail, no radio, just casual clothes and a small name badge clipped to his button-down shirt. A boy, around 9 years old with a dirt-smudged backpack, walked up to him, eyes filled with suspicion and curiosity. "Are you really the chief of police?" "Yes, I am." Johnson smiled, crouching to the boy's eye level. "My dad says police don't care about us kids. They only go after poor people." Johnson paused for a beat. Then he replied, his voice steady and sincere. "Your dad isn't wrong. A lot of folks in my profession have done things that made people lose trust. But I'm here to change that, and I need kids like you to help me do it." The boy looked at him for a long moment, then nodded and grinned. The first smile of that afternoon. Moments like these didn't make headlines. There were no cameras, no speeches, but they spread through authenticity, empathetic eyes, and handshakes between someone in uniform and someone who had once feared that very uniform. In neighborhood town halls, Johnson showed up on time. He listened to every question, never dodging complex topics like police violence or racial bias. He didn't make lofty promises. He made commitments through action. We can't erase the past, but from today forward, every small step, every patrol shift, every internal report will move toward transparency and respect. 1 month later, for the first time in 5 years, civilian complaints against the Blue Ridge Police Department dropped by 30%. Officers began speaking with residents on their own. Children no longer avoided them when walking by. The change had begun to take root in every street of the town. A year had passed since that grim morning when Officer Jimmy spat in Chief Johnson's face in the hallway of the Blue Ridge precinct. Today, that same hallway was still lit, but the light no longer came just from the fluorescent bulbs above. It radiated from a quiet yet steady transformation in every corner of Blue Ridge. Those unwilling to change had left. Some filed transfer requests, others opted for early retirement. There was no pressure, no punishment. Johnson had said only one thing during the internal meeting. "If you can't live up to the honor of your oath, feel free to take the exit. I won't hold anyone back." The door opened, and soon, new doors began to open inward. In their place came a new generation of officers from all walks of life. Individuals untouched by the old culture. They brought no prejudice. They brought questions, a willingness to listen, and a sincere commitment to serving the community. Officer Reyes, the once timid woman who bowed her head in guilt, was now head of the department's internal ethics advisory group. She proactively organized weekly sessions to talk about justice, unconscious bias, and how to handle sensitive situations with civilians. "I used to stay silent out of fear," she said, "but silence doesn't change anything. I'm here to make things right, not to hide." In the break room, once a stage for jokes laced with bias and mockery, now hung a simple sign: "Respect is a choice, and we choose it every day." Chief Johnson didn't lead through orders alone, but through presence. He walked through every department daily, not to inspect, but to talk. "How was patrol this morning? Anything bothering you lately? Which report made you feel most proud this month?" He didn't just ask. He listened and took notes. Even the civilians felt the difference. An older woman who lived in the slums on the town's edge had once fallen while shopping. 2 young officers had helped her up and walked her home. Now, she kept a framed photo of them on her kitchen table. She often said, "Back then, when I saw cops, I turned away. Now, when I see them, I wave. Of course, not everyone changed. Some still held on to prejudice deep inside, but now they knew there would be consequences if they acted on it. The old days of brotherhood cover-ups were gone. And among all this change, one man remained as composed as the day he first walked into the station in his worn sneakers. Chief Johnson. He didn't seek applause. He rarely spoke to the press. He didn't appear on television. But in Blue Ridge, people spoke his name with trust, something this town had lost long ago. One September afternoon, as the golden light of day's end cast a warm glow over the front steps of the Blue Ridge Police Department, Chief Johnson leaned against the railing, a cup of black coffee in hand. Before him, officers ending their shifts waved at each other, their smiles friendlier, their steps lighter than they had been in a long time. He nodded back quietly, saying nothing, just observing. Without a word, he knew he was witnessing something he once thought might take a lifetime to see. Transformation. On the desk in his office sat a handwritten letter from Mrs. Hamilton, a longtime town resident, carefully written in purple ink. I used to tell my granddaughter to stay away from the police, not to trust anyone in that uniform. Today she came home beaming, saying an officer stopped his car to tie her shoelace in the middle of the road. I didn't think something so small could make me cry. But I cried, because hope still exists. Johnson read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the top drawer. It wasn't a letter of praise. It was proof of purpose. In the hallway near the meeting room, a sign was hung that read, "Police are not symbols of power. They are guardians of trust." Below were photos of officers on duty within the community, playing basketball with teenagers, distributing meals to the homeless, and helping an older man fill out a social aid form. On a local podcast, the host asked, "Chief, do you think you've succeeded?" Johnson paused for a few seconds before answering, his voice low and steady. "I think success doesn't come from what I've done. It comes from how people here treat one another after I've done it. If a child can look at a police officer and think, that's someone I can trust, then that's success." The reform in Blue Ridge wasn't over. There were still problems to fix, still challenges ahead. But now, when a child sees a patrol car pass by and smiles, waves, instead of turning away in fear, Johnson knows a seed has been planted, and this soil is beginning to grow green. Johnson's story isn't just about a new leader. It's a reminder that respect doesn't need a business card. Justice doesn't need to intimidate. And change always begins with someone brave enough to be different,